It seems like the moment that a minor says, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I'm neither, that there's suddenly adults jumping in to participate in this delusion.
We understand that not affirming someone's identity can cause detriment to their development.
That's their second home. I want them to feel safe just like I want them to feel safe when they're under my roof.
Coming from poor Black working class communities, you just don't get that kind of message. So it feels very fulfilling.
This is a Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Crisis in the Classroom.
Education is a beacon of enlightenment in our country. Welcome to another edition of Your Voice, Your Future Crisis in the Classroom. I'm Armstrong Williams. Education unlocks doors to understanding, empowerment, and opportunity. It shares individuals not just by imparting knowledge, but by fostering critical thinking, creativity, and the ability to adapt to our ever-changing world. Today, schools in Ohio are facing a litany of issues, from teachers shortages, transgender pronoun policies that don't involve parents, and school safety issues. All of these issues and much more are contributing to poor educational outcomes for many students that we will explore today on Crisis in the Classroom. Thanks for joining us. First, serious concerns from members of a national advocacy group for parents about a school policy right here in Columbus, Ohio. The policy requires staff to use students' preferred pronouns. As Carly Van Cleve tells us, parents are informed, but they have no say in the matter.
The national advocacy group Parents Defending Education believes Columbus City school administrators could be leaving parents out of vital decisions for their kids.
That the school is overstepping.
A district policy put in place in 2022 requires staff to use a student's preferred pronouns. It lists they and them as examples. Erica Sanzi with PDE says this raised a red flag for them.
It seems like the moment that a minor says, I'm a boy, I'm a girl, I'm neither, that there's suddenly adults jumping in to participate in this delusion.
Sanzi believes the district is undermining parental authority.
The fact that they leave room to keep pushing on the issue with the parents after the parents have said no, that is a problem.
The policy does require the school to involve parents in discussions about gender identity. If a parent disagrees with a student's preference, they'll work to find a mutually agreeable solution.
It is a sensitive conversation, and contextually it's a topic to understand.
Denzel Porteous with Stonewall Columbus is in support of this policy and the kids who clearly define their pronouns.
We understand that not affirming someone's identity can cause detriment to their development.
Porteous believes the conversation between a student, parent, and school leaders is essential to foster a comfortable environment.
If there's challenges between, sort of the conflict of what the young person is saying and the parent says, this should open up a space of dialogue that could hopefully be facilitated by the public schools.
We reached out to district leaders. They shared a statement reading in part, "Parents are a vital component in this process and are not disregarded." Carly Van Cleve reporting.
Now we turn to our very distinguished panel. Joining us is Scott DeMauro, president of the Ohio Education Association, and Ohio State Representative E. Josh Williams, a Republican from District 4. We welcome you both to the broadcast from the 41st District. Representative Williams, obviously kids are confused about a lot of things, that they need direction from their parents. I think anyone can sort of assume what they are when they're a child, but they're children. What makes adults believe that children really understand what their identity is and the complications in terms of the mental and everything else that is associated with it, and not having the parents involved to guide them through that process?
I don't know what's leading to this push to allow children to identify as whatever they want without parental involvement, other than identifying it as a clear agenda towards removing parental consent and parental involvement here in the state of Ohio. I think no matter what, whether you're in public school or in other situations, parents always have the right to dictate how their children are brought up. They have a clearly outlined constitutional liberty interest in the way that their children are raised and educated, and they have to be involved in these important decisions moving forward.
How can the parent not be involved of any critical decision, since they have to bear the brunt of the psychological impact, the emotional impact? I mean, it's your child. Scott?
No, certainly. It is important that parents and educators be involved in a collaborative way to determine the best way to support all students. To answer your earlier question, where are these policies coming from? They're largely coming from parents of students who identify as transgender, who want to make sure
What
that
percentage of students are they?
Oh,
What
it's a small percentage.
Very small. So, so the minority decides for the majority?
No, that's not the case at all. It's a case of parents wanting to make sure that their children, just like all children, are safe and welcomed in our schools. As educators, we have a responsibility to serve all students, to make sure all students have a safe place to learn, all students have a welcoming place to learn. And so these issues, and parents certainly are part of the discussions on district level policy, should be part of those discussions. None of these are policies that are being imposed on anyone, but the voices that I think oftentimes get discounted in some of these conversations when you're talking about trends or you're talking about agendas are the voices of the parents who are directly involved. Some transgender students, LGBTQ students more broadly, are the most frequently bullied students in our schools. We have to make sure that all schools and all students are safe.
Can I reply to that?
Please.
So to believe that these policies are coming from parents of trans students, I think is just totally incorrect. Because if you're a parent of a trans student and you want to change your child's gender, your pronoun, the name, you can go to the courts and change the name. You can petition the court to change your child's name if you want to. You can go to the school and say, I prefer my child to be addressed as X, but to force those policies on other parents to say, if your child is transgender, you can't be involved in the decisions that are being made as long as your child is in the school is improper. So to have a small subset of our student body and our parents being able to dictate to the majority situations where it's not involving their child, it's other parents' children that they're pushing policies to say that those children should be able to be reclassified, they should be able to identify as a different gender, even without the parents' input, is improper, in my opinion. It isn't a policy that's being pushed by the parents of transgender students. It's clearly an agenda, a social agenda that's being pushed into our schools.
What has he just said that's unreasonable, Scott?
Well, I think there's this narrative that somehow there's an agenda that's being promoted that just isn't supported by the actual evidence. I'm not aware of any situations in my experience, and again, I'm talking from my experience, and I'm talking from when I watched the debate happening on this, where you have any notable number of students who are asking for some kind of recognition and the parents aren't part of that conversation. When dozens and dozens and dozens of students and parents came to the State House to protest against some of the changes that were being made in state law that they felt were discriminatory against trans students, it was students and parents saying that they wanted their rights to be protected.
So when do we get to the place when you look at how America is losing the educational battle in terms of, it seems as though these kids are continuously dumbed down. When are we going to ever get to teaching these kids why they're in the classroom in the first place? Learn English, arithmetic, writing, science. Why do these kids need such a distraction? Are these issues that kids should be involved in the first place?
I don't believe it's an issue where the government should be involved in shaping the minds of those children absent parental involvement. And that's the main question. As we've reached a point now where we believe it's the government's role to introduce social emotional learning inside of the classroom, shaping the mind of these young students that may be in direct conflict with the way they're being raised at home. And that's the main concern that parents have. If this wasn't a clear agenda...
So what you're indicating is they're creating conflict in the home between the parent and the child.
Correct. And what we've started to see in the state of Ohio and in other states is when that conflict starts to rise up, we've actually seen parents lose custody of their children because they will not affirm the child's gender identity. We've seen that. It's happened in states across America where parents have lost custody because the child changes gender in the classroom.
When does that happen in Ohio?
I'm sorry?
When, I said, give me an example. Of when
There
that's
has been
happened in
custody
Ohio.
cases where fathers have been restricted from visitation because they wouldn't affirm a child's gender. And we've seen it in multiple states as well. We just saw it in, I believe it was Indiana or Illinois, where both parents lost full custody of the child over it. And we were even seeing it in California where they introduced a bill that would allow the child to run away from home into the care of the state, and the state would not even inform you where your child is if it was for gender affirming care. This is an agenda. We're clearly seeing it. We're seeing the largest teachers union in the United States come out in support of this and push these policies forward. So it's clearly an agenda. And if it wasn't, the House bill that was introduced here, the Parents' Bill of Rights, would easily have passed with unanimous bipartisan support. But I sit on that committee. And what we saw was counselors come in and say they should be able to take our children out of the classroom and give them counseling sessions about their gender identity without disclosing those sessions to the parents.
Can we get legislation? What about the YouGo sponsored legislation last year calling for a Parents' Bill of Rights, which have required schools to notify parents about student health and the use of instructional materials containing sexual content? Why do you feel those rights should be guaranteed to Ohio parents? Why?
Well, this is a solution in search of a problem. The reality is that parents,
seems like the problem is being created.
Parents already have the ability to choose what their children are going to learn about in school. When, and again, I've been in education for 30 years. If I ever had a parent of a student who objected to a particular concept or a particular course of study or particular reading material, whether it was in my class or an English class, the parent had the ability to say, hey, I'd like an alternative assignment for my child. The problem is that you have a small group of parents that are trying to impose their views on everybody else. And I think for the vast majority of parents, we know that they fully support the work that our public schools are doing to serve their students. We know that our educators are working very hard to lift up the success of kids, regardless of their background. Yet people are trying to push an agenda that is about lifting up conflict and division and turning people against each other rather than focusing on, I think you raised a good point earlier, why don't we focus on making sure that all students are successful in their learning? And that includes their academic learning, that includes making sure that they are literate, that they are equipped with the skills that are necessary to collaborate and communicate in a 21st century environment, that they're good citizens, that they're good critical thinkers. All of that is embedded in our learning standards. And I think, we can agree that we have an interest as a people of the state of Ohio to make sure that we are preparing our students for the future. And that's what our educators across the state are focused on every single day.
Well, we appreciate the conversation and your service. We appreciate your being a legislature. We'll continue to debate these issues, but in the end, it has to be what's best for the child and the parent, because they're the first and last line of responsibility. Thanks to my panel. We have so much more to discuss when we return on Crisis in the Classroom. We look at policy and curriculum changes in Ohio. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Crisis in the Classroom. I'm Armstrong Williams. Safety inside the classroom is very important to parents and students alike. Katie Seifert shows us how threats of violence against schools, even if they're not credible, is having an impact on the districts and families.
Newark City Schools, one of 3 Licking County districts that received a non-credible threat over the weekend. But parents and leaders of those districts tell me it still created quite a few challenges for them and their students.
It's devastating. It's heartbreaking.
Brittany Meisner has 2 young girls in Lakewood City Schools. It's one of 3 districts that police say received threats over the weekend.
That's their second home. I want them to feel safe just like I want them to feel safe when they're under my roof.
The Licking County Sheriff's Office says the 13-year-old accused of allegedly making threats against the districts was a student within the Heath City Schools. Officials did not disclose what the threat he made was, but say it was deemed not credible because the suspect had no means by which to carry out the threats.
It's hard, but this is the world we live in. You know, it's extremely frustrating, you know, to have something like this occur.
Heath Superintendent Trevor Thomas says he was notified of the alleged threats late Saturday evening.
There was a real element of panic for some kids. They looked at it and said, do I need to be concerned coming to school tomorrow?
That would be anxiety provoking.
Experts say creating stability for kids is key once they're back at school.
Being a child, you're just figuring it all out, and you rely upon the people around you and the structure around you for a sense of safety and security and to some extent predictability.
School was back in session Monday for all 3 districts. Calls and posts like these were shared with families, letting them know it was safe. Communication, one of the easier parts in a scenario like this.
With any issue like this that comes up, our communication and ability to respond improves.
Unfortunately, this is becoming a frequent conversation.
The bigger battle moving forward, Meisner says, is making sure students take every threat seriously, no matter how often they're made.
So you're thinking, oh, this is never going to happen to me. I don't want our children to think that. I don't want my girls to think that.
Joining us now is Katie Seifert. You know, with shooting on the rise, there is some advocacy for teachers not only to be trained, but to carry firearms. And many of the teachers said, why should I train and be forced to carry a firearm when my focus should be the classroom? That's somebody else's job and responsibility. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, I mean, there are some school districts in the state of Ohio that have discussed and talked about allowing their teachers to do this. The schools that we talked to were in that story that we just showed you, none of them allow their teachers to carry firearms, but they do have a lot of security measures at the school. But I think the question is, are those security measures enough? Is that enough to protect students? So they talked about funding from the state for things like key fobs, when you come in and out of schools, and safety vestibules as well. But then there's also, do they have, security resource officers on campus as well, and all of those things. But do these schools get enough funding for that? And then you ask the question of, well, if there isn't enough funding to go around for all of these different aspects and assets for safety at the school, then do you have to resort to having, these teachers that are trained to have these firearms? I asked, some of these superintendents we spoke to about, can you move funding around? Is it, do you take money out of athletics and move it into safety, or how do you do that? And everybody says, of course, that safety is their top priority, especially after an incident like this.
From what these districts have told us, Katie, is a school resource officer necessary?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. This was about 3 districts we spoke to. So 2 of them had school resource officers, but one of them did not have a school resource officer. So I asked that question, okay, so are you going to be bringing funding in? Is that something that you want to allocate new funding as far as school resource officers go? And the one district that did not have a school resource officer had said, we're really, really close and nearby to our city police department. We rely on them. But I asked, well, how close is their response time? He said 2 to 4 minutes. Well, if someone's already in a school, obviously that's a lot of time. 2 to 4 minutes is a lot of time. A lot can happen in that time.
We've seen what can happen in that amount of time.
Exactly. Yeah. So is there going to be now new funding? And the school that did not have a resource officer is the same school that 13-year-old boy that we talked about in that story, he went to that school.
Is there a model in the state that absolutely works for what we're discussing?
I think that's a great question. There's so many districts in different environments, right? We talk about Columbus City Schools in the heart of Central Ohio, our biggest school district in the state. I would think that what they are doing has to be different than the schools that we talked about in this story in more rural communities that are in the middle, in the middle of nowhere and have a different, totally different number of students and demographics of students that go there. So I really do think it's based on, from what I have seen, based on the environment, the student population, and in the families within that district and their needs.
Somebody watching us, I can hear them crying out, say, what about the parents? What about if a kid is consistently disruptive, why not remove the kid from that environment and allow kids to remain that want to learn?
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring this up. Now, I don't know if you mean, just any child that's disruptive, but if a child is making a threat or is violent in school or talking amongst other students and saying, hey, I'm going to do this, or posting, hey, I'm going to do that. So this is something that I discussed with one of the superintendents I spoke to in that story that we just showed you. And that superintendent from Heath, he told me, there should be laws that are in place that allow us as administration to determine whether or not a student can come back into the classroom and be, make sure that they are safe and they're not threatening to other students, so that families feel comfortable. Right now, there's a House bill that is kind of working its way through. It's in a standstill right now in committee, but that law would, if that does come to fruition, it would allow those superintendents to determine whether or not that student, if they're expelled for a year, to come back to school.
It's obvious you have a lot of passion for this topic. It impacts all of us. Thank you so much for your outstanding reporting and joining us.
Thank you.
We're back with our panel, Scott DeMauro and Ohio State Representative Josh Williams. This is a very delicate issue when it comes to resource officers, whether you have enough, and whether or not, even if you have resource officers, if someone is properly trained and knows how to use a firearm, given the escalation of these kids and their mental issues and the parents have little or no control, it is another option. It's an option that could save lives. And if you were a parent, maybe you'd want that option. What is the best scenario from what you've seen across the country to address this? I'll start with you, Scott, this issue of firearms, resource officers, and people in the classroom ground being trained.
Well, absolutely. I think we want to make sure that all schools are safe, and schools have taken extraordinary steps over the last several years to make sure that important security measures are in place, that a stranger can't just walk off the street and walk into a school without having to go through a number of steps in that process. There are some places where local communities have decided that having trained school resource officers is the best way to ensure the safety of their students. I think it's important in situations like that we're not creating essentially police state types of situations in our schools. But if you're going to have anybody who is providing armed security for schools, it needs to be people who are fully trained, where that's their professional responsibility. I think, unfortunately, in some cases, because of lack of resources, teachers have been tasked with that, or other school employees have been tasked for that, and we have real concerns about that.
Representative Josh Williams, we've seen school districts across our Ohio markets debating the effectiveness of school resource officers, some considering cutting the job altogether. Where do you stand on that debate?
I think every single high school in the state of Ohio should have a school resource officer that is properly armed and trained. I think when it comes to elementaries and junior highs, we can provide security in other manners than having a school resource officer on site, but I would prefer them to be in every single building here in the state of Ohio. But we want to see things such as single points of entry that are bulletproof, essentially, now knowing the increased rate of soft targets, gun-free zones being the targets of individuals that want to do harm to our children. And the idea that if teachers or other administrators of the building open doors, like we saw in Uvalde, leaving easy access to a back door to an armed shooter, that there should be criminal consequences for individuals like that. They need to take the security of our children seriously. It's a requirement for parents to send their children to school. We are requiring parents to do that. And then at the same time, while those children are there, they need to be safe and secure inside of that building. We need to know that when I drop off my child in the morning, he's going to be coming home to me in the afternoon.
You know, we both know that law enforcement, Scott, on the best days, they can arrive 2 minutes after the call, and they can arrive at carnage. Some would say having people trained and armed is a deterrent if the child knows that you have someone in that building that's armed.
And it can be. And that's why I think some school districts have chosen that path that Representative Williams has suggested of having armed, trained school resource officers in those buildings. That may not be something that every community wants to do, depending on the circumstances of the community. And
who makes that decision?
It's up to local school boards. It's very clear in Ohio law, and I think that's where the decision should be made. But if anyone is being expected to provide that function of providing armed protection for students in a school, they really do need to be fully trained. And right now, state law in Ohio sets a woefully minimum standard of 24 hours for training for people who are not those school resource officers to carry guns.
You know, Representative Williams, just a month ago, a 14-year-old student admitted to planning a school shooting at a Cincinnati area high school. He says he was planning it with a Colorado man who he met on TikTok. Is social media emerging as an area of concern when it comes to school safety? And do you understand the movement by Congress to just ban it altogether?
It is a concern that kids are getting access to individuals through social media where their parents don't have any control over whether or not they even sign up for accounts. That's our main concern here in the state of Ohio, that minors can sign up for social media accounts even without parental consent. So sometimes you don't even know that your child has a Facebook page or a Twitter page or a TikTok page that they can access while they're at school on their tablet and use other individuals' phones to gain access. So it's definitely a concern. It's been a concern since the rise in school shootings, the popularity that we give to the school shooters, putting their face on TV, showing it over and over and over again, their trials. And it's kind of become a sense of infamy among our youth. And it's truly a concern that you have individuals that are essentially recruiting our kids to do harm to their peers for whatever reason. Each one is individual. But what we saw up in Michigan was parents, taking an active role in providing firearms to their children.
The Cromleys.
Yeah, knowing that their child actually was in possession of the firearm on the day in question and not alerting the school. Those are like true concerns, and they're going to stand. They're going to stand for justice, in the state of Michigan when it comes to those parents and the neglect that they showed and demonstrated when it came to providing firearms to minors, especially when that minor showed clear intent to do harm to others.
And I just want to just add to that, and I'm glad you brought up the Michigan case. This is a shared responsibility. I think too many kids have easy access to weapons. There needs to be more common sense measures to make sure that guns are locked away safely in people's homes. We've got to make sure that...
So you're advocating that parents should be held accountable?
Absolutely, parents should be held accountable. And I think we also need some common sense laws, understanding that schools don't exist in vacuums. The governor, after the Dayton massacre, called on the legislature to pass common sense, universal background checks, red flag laws. Those kinds of measures, I think, would be helpful. We need to take a holistic approach to ensure every student is safe in our schools.
We do disagree when it comes to the Second Amendment, clearly. I don't think you can require parents to lock away their guns permanently. I mean, I've raised a young man and guns were always accessible inside of my home because if a burglar breaks in, we've seen 11-year-olds grab AR-15s and defend their home. We've seen them use firearms to protect their home, and you can't require parents to have them back behind lock and key and bolt and make it where they're inaccessible. But I think in Michigan, what Michigan highlighted was when the parents were actively involved in providing firearms to this minor. They knew that the minor had possession of the firearm on the day in question after they came home from the school, didn't tell the school, and they actually fought to keep the kid in school that day.
And now they're paying the ultimate price.
So that's when you hold parents accountable.
Yeah, I think we all will agree on that. We must keep our teachers and attract more good teachers. When we return to Crisis in the Classroom, don't go anywhere. You know, I travel across this country talking about education issues. Welcome back to Crisis in the Classroom. We are in Columbus, Ohio, discussing the issues. One of the biggest issues, not only in Ohio, but around the country, is a teacher shortage. Megan Mongillo shows us how one district is tackling its own shortage by growing future teachers. From where? The inside.
Eyes closed, pins down.
A lesson in intuition is part of the curriculum in this high school classroom.
What we value, what we do.
Prince Edward Johnson II teaches at Aiken twice a week, but he isn't a high school teacher. He's a college professor from Miami University.
Coming from poor Black working class communities, you just don't get that kind of message. So it feels very fulfilling.
He's part of a program called Teach Cincinnati. It started back in 2018. It works by recruiting high school students who want to be teachers. Those students take college classes for credit, then get admission into Miami University's education program with financial support. Once they graduate, they get preferred hiring status back at CPS.
It is hard to actually build a pipeline for a teacher shortage when you have a teacher shortage.
But leaders at Cincinnati Public are doing it. This year, 38 Aiken students are in the pipeline, including Ari and Deja.
I want to be the teacher that could build her relationship with students and make sure they get the resources they need. Like, whether it's just somebody to talk to or just somebody to, actually help them. I want to be that person.
I want to be an example for other students, especially because we don't really have a lot of African American teachers, and I want to be an example so that they can be around someone that is just like them, basically.
The young women want to go to college. This video, produced by Miami University, shows what life on campus will be like.
I was already familiarized with Miami University in high school because of the class and of the curriculum that was built there.
He's one of 11 who remained engaged with Teach Cincinnati, out of 32 who started the program at Aiken back in 2018.
I feel like you need your education, so I want to be the reason that people come to school. I want to be the reason that they feel like school is needed.
The college sophomores are a few years away from being future educators in the Cincinnati Public School District.
Again, we're back with our all-star panel. Joining us again is Scott DeMauro, president of the Ohio Education Association, and State Representative E. Josh Williams from the 41st District. We welcome you back. Scott, you led the largest teachers union in Ohio. As states nationwide struggle with teachers' retention, what are you hearing from your members, and what are their frustrations with the profession currently?
Well, we hear about this issue all the time, and I think the pandemic really exacerbated a problem that had been developing for a while, leading many districts to really struggle to recruit and retain qualified people for education positions. There's a couple things that we hear. One is that adequate pay is a real concern. There are 50% fewer people choosing majors in education in Ohio's colleges and universities compared to a decade ago. And I think if you talk to young people, they'll tell you very honestly, they want to go where they can have a lucrative career and be able to put food on their table and care for their families. And for too long, I think education is seen as kind of a substandard profession when it comes to pay. So we're advocating for an increase in that. But I think we also have to address working condition issues in our schools. We need to make sure that educators feel respected and valued in the work that they do. And that means that they're in situations where there's reasonable class sizes, where you have good supports for students who have extra needs, and that our schools are safe. All of those things are important. Programs to help bring young people into the profession, these grow your own programs like the one that we hear about in Cincinnati with Miami University, I think are promising practices to really remind people of what a tremendously fulfilling profession education truly is.
Representative Williams, also to address this issue of retention, you have this program called Teach Cincinnati. How are you hoping that Teach Cincinnati can change these statistics as it relates to retention?
Well, a lot of students want to see themselves reflected in their teachers. A lot of minority students have never had a minority teacher. A lot of minority students and male students have never had male teachers. So they want to see themselves at the head of the classroom. We do want to make it economical for you to go into that profession so you can feed your family. At the same time, make sure that we have quality teachers. And I think one of the big issues that's starting to become a problem is the appreciation that we have for our teachers. The earlier segment, when we talk about these social issues that are leaking into the school districts and into the classroom, it's putting teachers in an uncomfortable position where now they get demonized because of the programs that are being pushed by the administrators into the classroom, and that makes it where they feel unappreciated, right? And instead, we want to have parents engage with the teachers. We want teachers to be able to educate our students with great curriculum, seeing our scores grow, our GPAs grow, and we're doing what we're supposed to do, which is educate these young minds so they can go as adults and become working professionals, college students, lawyers, doctors, and are able to progress in our society. And it all starts in the classroom, starting in kindergarten and even pre-K.
You know, Scott, the subject areas statewide that people are struggling to hire and retain teachers in special education. There's such a deficiency there. What do you think is the root of the challenge, and how can schools across the country, especially here in Ohio, can address that?
Well, I think it's definitely a need, and some of that reflects the fact that there are more students identified on individual education plans who require special education services. So the demand is greater than it's ever been. And at a time where you don't have a large supply of new teachers coming through the system, that's why you have a lot of shortages in those areas. Special education sometimes can be some of the most challenging work, especially if you're working with students with multiple disabilities, who might have behavior issues in schools. And so, yeah, extra attention needs to be placed on that. I want to agree with what Representative Williams said earlier. It is important not just to get more people coming into the profession, but really put a focus on having an educator workforce that reflects the diversity of our students. You're 100% on point on that. And I also agree that the politics of what we've seen over the last few years, and for a lot of teachers, they feel like they've been the subject of a lot of culture war attacks, and that is a deterrence. And that for a lot of teachers who are just trying to do their best serving their students, you know, they feel like they're under attack. And again, that importance of respecting, lifting up teachers and the profession and the work that they do, and really being focused on student success as the ultimate goal in all of this, I think will help move us a long way. If we can agree on that, I think that's good for all of the students and educators in Ohio.
And it's also important that teachers are proficient and well-trained and studied in the subject matters that they teach, because they can find the joy and excitement in getting that child who sometimes have difficulty to learn. You know, Representative Williams, the Senate passed a bill in December lowering the existing requirements for advanced educator's license, as well as making it easier for schools to hire unlicensed teachers. Supporters say the bill reduces unnecessary barriers and will help teacher shortages. Your concerns?
Well, I'm concerned that individuals will enter into the profession that may not be motivated by the right circumstances, now that there's a little bit of a lower standard, but at the same time, it's the idea of local control. We want the local school districts to have the ability to hire individuals that they believe will be proficient inside of the classroom. Sometimes they won't have those teacher certificates that their peers will have, but they will be excellent teachers. They'll be proficient in other ways. They'll have industrial expertise that they could bring into the classroom, whether it's to teach vocational courses or other subject matter. So I think it's important that we have qualified teachers that are teaching, but I think it's the local school districts that are best in the situation to evaluate who is a good teacher and who is a good candidate to become a teacher in their school district.
You know, Representative Williams just touched on something, Scott. You know, all kids don't learn the same. And not every kid is meant for the classroom, just like every kid is not meant for college. Sometimes a vocational, a skill, whether it's carpentry, whether it's welding, whatever it is, sometimes you got to take that kid where they can best learn and ignite the gifts that they have.
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of unsung heroes across our state who are teaching kids those kinds of skills that are really focused more in the career tech areas, and doing some incredible work there. And we do have, by the way, when we're talking about teacher qualifications, Ohio provides a range of alternative pathways for licensure. What we don't want to see happen while we're addressing an educator shortage is dumbing down the standards and somehow lowering our expectations for quality. We need to have high quality educators. Maybe they come into that in different ways, but we can't lower that standard. Instead, we have to address the pay issues, we have to address the working condition issues that are going to really help us in a meaningful way retain and recruit people into the profession.
You know, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the fact that you both care. I mean, I think disagreement and challenges is very healthy, because if everybody agrees, then somebody's not growing. And I just know how much we appreciate this dialogue. Now, when we return, we look at funding for education on this special edition of Your Voice, Your Future: Crisis in the Classroom. We have much more to talk about. Recently, Dr. Ben Carson, the famed neurosurgeon, and Ben Crump, civil rights icon, we wrote this book about crisis in the classroom, about civil rights being denied to our children. And there's nothing more important than their education, which is a civil rights. Your assignment for us is to order our book, Crisis in the Classroom, and make sure your child is getting the education deserves, regardless of their zip code. Get Crisis in the Classroom wherever good books are sold around this nation. Welcome back to Crisis in the Classroom. I'm Armstrong Williams. While many of you who play the lotto have yet to strike it rich, you still may think you're helping fund public education in Ohio. Lisa Rantala is breaking down the figures to see how much lotto money school districts really receive.
Scratching off prizes from $5 to $50.
So I hope you have your Powerball tickets out.
Or multiplying that by 100 or 1,000 if you match the right numbers with these bouncing balls. Revenues from the Ohio Lottery is reaching new heights, along with the amounts contributed to Ohio's education system. Just how much? The Ohio Lotto handed over $803 million to the state in fiscal year 2013, compared to $1.4 billion in 2022. However, the Lotto money is then thrown into an education pot with more state dollars and other funds. With the state dollars fluctuating up and down throughout the years, the fund just hit more than $11 billion last year for Ohio schools. And no matter who contributed what, all of the education funds are funneled through Ohio's funding formula that provides additional money to schools and districts that do not have the capacity and wealth to raise revenues locally, as in a school levy. Columbus City school leaders say they will have to cut more than 600 positions if their levy to generate $100 million per year does not pass next week. According to the Ohio Department of Education, CCS's state funds have jumped by $20 million these last few years, with a projected drop in fiscal year 2025. Dublin City Schools warns of larger class sizes and the cut of 200 positions if its levy fails Tuesday. DCS's state funding is projected to jump by $3 million this fiscal year, with a drop next fiscal year. Groveport Madison Schools indicates it will lose $6 million a year if voters reject its levy. ODE indicated the district's state funding will increase by $6 million this fiscal year, with an additional increase next fiscal year. As for Canal Winchester Schools looking to keep its $7 million a year in a renewal levy, the state had increased the district's funding by $1 million since fiscal year 2022. But the district could see a projected drop in year 2025.
So, Representative Williams, let me start with you. How does the allocation of lottery revenue to education in Ohio impact the funding needed addressed by schools' levies on the ballot?
Yeah. So the idea is that we raise revenue through the lottery system, and then we allocate that towards our school districts, so they don't just rely on their wealth distribution to raise millage, which is essentially raising a levy to pay for the education. The state has an obligation to provide for educational funds for students, and we take that seriously. We just implemented, the school voucher program, expanding it to be universal here in the state of Ohio. So we're trying to provide every opportunity for students to get the best education they can, but it has to be high quality education that's worth every penny that we pay.
Do you think with school levying appearing on the ballot in Ohio, Scott, what concerns do taxpayers have about the use of the lottery money purportedly earmarked for education?
Well, I think it's important to remember that lottery funds are just one revenue source that the state uses to fulfill its obligation under the funding formula. The number one source of those revenues is state income tax money and then state sales tax money. So lottery just goes into that bucket and then gets redistributed. Local levies are really based on the needs of a local community to cover the expenses that state funding doesn't cover. And the state provides more money to lower wealth districts if the local community doesn't have the property wealth to generate funds through a levy to meet that need, then the state provides more. If it's a higher wealth community, the state provides less. But from time to time, because costs increase and the funding doesn't necessarily match those increasing funds, they have to go back to the voters.
What mechanism then is in place to ensure transparency and accountability in the distribution of the lottery profits to these educational institutions?
Well, you just look at the total amount that's allocated by the state. Like you said, it's a pool. There's multiple sources that contribute to that pool, and then it's public record what each district gets. We had a discussion earlier about what my home district of Toledo gets. We're the second highest funded school district in the state of Ohio, surprisingly, and that has not led to better educational outcomes for the students in Toledo.
Let me interject something, because my brother is a state senator in South Carolina, and they face this issue. And what is interesting about it is that they place all this money in the lotto, but the minority kids, those that are trying to reach disadvantage, never qualify for the scholarships and the grants. How do you address that?
Well, here, there's no discrimination when it comes to our scholarship, which is the EdChoice voucher. Every student in the state of Ohio is entitled to that voucher. They can opt out of public schools and go to a private institution. They can also choose to enroll in what are known as 08 schools, non-chartered, non-public schools. They can do homeschooling. We have a large array of educational opportunities here in the state of Ohio, so parents can choose what's the best option for their child. And it was unfair that parents that were in failing school districts or school districts that were putting in social issues inside of the classroom, that those parents could only opt their child out if they had the money to pay private tuition. Now every parent has that opportunity to go to a private institution in the state of Ohio.
So Scott, how are the teachers and families in school districts where these levies, impact is having a huge impact, do they create new challenges?
Well, I think it's important to understand first, that it's the responsibility under the Constitution for the state of Ohio to provide a thorough and efficient system of funding public schools across the state. When the state provides money to private school vouchers, that's money that is taken away from the nearly 90% of Ohio's kids that attend our public schools. And so that is a big debate, and I know that Representative Williams and I are on opposite sides of that debate, especially when there are no accountability measures in place for how those monies are being spent in those private schools. But you asked about levies.
No, that's okay.
And at the local level, that's another whole question.
Let me get this into Representative Williams. Yeah. Ohio passed this universal school choice last year, expanding private school scholarships eligibility to all the families. Do you think last year's action was the right move for the state's education dollars?
Absolutely. I support it wholeheartedly. I wish we would have saw the backpack bill get fully implemented so we could see homeschoolers get compensated, these 08 schools get compensated. What we chose to do in the interim is expand these vouchers, but I do want to respond to a statement that he made, that somehow by funding these vouchers, it is taking money away from the public institution. I think that's a false premise.
It's a false premise. And I think you've explained why it's a false.
Well, I believe the important point is the school district doesn't own the student. The tax dollars are allocated to the individual student. So the idea that if that student leaves the school district, somehow you're losing money, you're not. You're losing a student.
We'll leave that. I want to thank you both for joining this discussion. As we've seen today, improving the educational system in Ohio is of paramount importance. Without fostering a good education system, students will be shut out from the economy, relegated to the streets, forced to struggle to survive, but not all is lost. There are still good people in the educational system in Ohio willing to put in the work to improve the system, and there are still parents willing to step up to make a difference. Thank you very much for joining us today on Crisis in the Classroom in Ohio. I'm Armstrong Williams.